Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Falsco, President and CEO of the Alaska World Affairs Council. And it's such a pleasure to be here today and to see all of you virtually. If you are new to an Alaska World Affairs Council program, please raise your hand. Do we have any new people today? Wonderful. Well, it's so great to see you. Thank you for joining us. We have so many wonderful programs coming up on our schedule in addition to the one that you're going to see today. So I hope you come back again soon. You'll find our programs on our website at alaskapublic.org. And we also have more coming that you don't see. So the month of October is a busy month. You'll want to keep us on your radar because we have, in addition to PAC by popular demand, our program today with Dr. Yong Zhao, who's talking about the future of education in a post-pandemic world. We have World Whiz Pub Trivia going virtual on October 16th. This is a fundraiser for the Alaska World Affairs Council. You won't want to miss it. For all of you that are joining us today, spoiler alert on the topics. You'll get a little bit of a head start and cash prizes will be awarded to the winning teams. So our topics for this year for our World Whiz Pub Trivia, you're hearing it here first today. We have some current events in short attention span theater, World Quest, Brexit and the EU, oceans, the world's garbage dump. I see some of you writing these down. The wide world of sports, food of all nations, and probably the most difficult category of all, what didn't suck in 2020? So those are our categories for our World Whiz Pub Trivia on the 16th. We're going to have a happy hour beforehand and after. It's going to be a whole lot of fun, and you can sign up for that on our website. So join us for World Whiz. It's going to be great. Please say hello to us in the chat box. Tell us where you are tuning in from. I'm here in Anchorage. It's about 50 degrees. It's on and off rain. And I hope that it's nice and the air is clean wherever you are around the world. Like we did at our last program, we're going to have some pop-up questions that are popping up throughout the program, some polls. It's a little bit of fun on the topic. So feel free to answer the polls, tell us what you think, and join the conversation that way. You'll see those popping up throughout the hour. We also have a chat forum. You can put in your questions at any time. Let us know the question. We'll read them at the end, or if you want to ask a question directly. One person sent in a question ahead of time. We'll read that question. We do that during the last approximately 20 minutes of this program. So join the conversation and let us know what you're thinking in the chat function. We want to have a special thanks to our members like you. If you are a member of the Alaska World Affairs Council, thank you so much for supporting programs like this. It's people like you that make it possible for us to do programs like this, as well as our partners and supporters, the Junior World Affairs Council, Alaska Public Media, the CIRI Foundation, Humanities Forum, the Atwood Foundation, and the Rasmussen Foundation. Thank you so much to all of our partners and supporters and all of you. I see some of you that are familiar and some new people. Like I said, if you're new, come again. We have so many great programs. I mentioned a few coming in October, but we are coming throughout the year. So join us again for an Alaska World Affairs Council program. And with that, I want to turn over the microphone to the chair of the Alaska World Affairs Council Board of Directors, Mr. Steve Limbeck, who will be introducing our speaker today. Steve, you are on mute.
On this Friday program. We're delighted to partner with so many organizations around our state and to see so many people from around the country and the world even to joining us. Our speaker today is Yong Zhao, who's currently a Foundation Distinguished Professor in the School of Education at the University of Kansas and also a Professor in Educational Leadership at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education in Australia. He's had a long and distinguished academic career with various posts at places like the University of Oregon, Michigan State University, Linfield College, and Willamette University. He's a prolific scholar with more than 100 articles and 30 books with titles like An Education Crisis is a Terrible Thing to Waste, Never Send a Human to Do a Machine's Job, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Dragon? Why China has the best and worst education system in the world, and Catching Up or Leading the Way, American Education in the age of globalization. He was born in China's Sichuan province, where he received his BA in English and then spent 6 years teaching English in China before he went on to the United States for graduate education work at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He took his master's in education there in 1994 and his Ph.D. in 1996. He's now a member of the National Academy of Education and a fellow of the International Academy of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Yong Zhao.
Thank you, Steve. That's a very nice introduction. I don't even remember most of the things you said. I did, but anyway, I think they're true. Liz, thank you for having me. It's so great to be back to Alaska and to really chat with everyone about what's the future of education. This is probably the best time to ask that question. I know many parents and educators right now at this moment are simply interested in getting back to the school, getting back to normal. But I was just wondering if that normal is what we wanted before the pandemic. You know, we had a lot of problems with the schools. We were not happy with the schools. Now, suddenly, because of this pandemic, we just want to go back. I'm not sure just simply going back is what we want. So I want to use this moment and to share a few thoughts with you because of the pandemic. I have actually had opportunity to talk to more people, to connect to more people, to make more presentations, to interact with a lot of people, more than I could ever have actually. But I have not stepped out of my house in Oregon for the past almost 7 months. I think the day after tomorrow, I've not even got out of my house. You know, I mean, I got out of my house, I got out of my yard, but never been to the city. But funny enough that I got connected. I gave a keynote address to New Zealand the day before, another keynote to Australia yesterday to about 4,000 people. I don't know how they get 4,000 people in Australia. And today I'm speaking to a group of people organized by you. And next week I'm speaking to people, I think in Estonia. And last week I was with the 5 countries in called the ARC. That's, you know, Uruguay, it's Iceland, Scotland, Ireland. It's just really interesting, just fascinating, you know, ways of doing this. It's so I just want to share with you what I've observed, what I thought, but I really want this to be a conversation. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put in chat because I want this to be really a short presentation. I don't want you to be tired, to be bored on Zoom, which I guess everyone is zoomed out nowadays. You've had too much Zooms or Team or all those things. So that's what I can write my background. So the first thing I really want to invite all of us to think is, you know, we were forced to go online. And everybody was forced to go online. And in America, today, even, you know, the US president and first lady got, I don't know, got positive, which is, I think has scared the stock market, but may not be able to scare Alaskans. You know, you guys are too far away from the real problem. However, if you look at this in the US, what's been happening is quite fascinating. Short of the disruptions, you know, we would be definitely devastated by the number of cases and number of deaths in the US. You know, I would say US is probably truly among the worst countries who've been dealing with this. But what has happened is that it forced many schools to close. Virtually, you know, from the United Nations, virtually 97% of schools closed last month, you know, at least for a while. So, which really caused something shocking. You know, in education, we've been trying to convince schools that using technology is a good idea, but actually not very successful for 30, 20, 10 years, not very successful. By and large, many teachers use technology, but are still controlled within their own teaching. maybe a PowerPoint here, a video there, but not really entirely think about this. However, almost overnight, without much convincing, without incentives, we turned online. We turned into remote teaching. That's not easy, but we did it. So the first thing I want to comment on is that schools can change. Schools can even change into something without schooling. Teachers can change. We change rapidly, dramatically. Students can change. We've changed all this time. Parents can change. We've been trying home and taking care of kids. So there is possibility of change. But education, as many of you who are involved in this business, hasn't gone through really big changes for the last maybe 100 years. What does this say about that? So I want us to really think about this. So now we've changed. That's the second question come to think about. Second thing is that we've changed. We've been giving food to students. We've been driving around. We've been making phone calls. We've been offering online. We've been doing a lot of things without the classroom, without this one classroom. What does that mean for learning? I know many schools may have already been just replicating their schools, doing online teaching, and discovered that's not very effective. But now when students are scattered, what does that mean? Are they as connected as we are as adults? Many adults, we connect everywhere. This disconnection has made us become more connected. But are we feeding our students from our connections? Because Alaska World Affairs Council, you guys are doing wonderful work. Want to bring the world into our schools, into Alaska. Are we doing that? We can, but are we? So that's the second question. Are we taking advantage of the online remote education model to really bring global competency, global affairs, the world into our classroom? And then are we helping our students to reach out, to talk to people in China, Hong Kong, Europe, Australia, Argentina, in all these places? Are we formulating large global scale projects so our students can study the pandemic, study policies, politics, study the science of it, study how globally speaking we can work together? We should be working together, but we are not, about vaccines. There's so much we can study as a global project, but are we doing that? Are we recreating our classroom, or are we still thinking of our classroom as me as a teacher, I have to teach you and train you? So that's another big project. I think we can always think about that. Is it valuable to simply to say, yes, I'm offering remote learning, but are we taking advantage of the remote learning? And then when we even go back to school, do we give up as many schools do? China has completely given up whatever it took so much time and efforts to create the remote learning things. Almost all Chinese teachers did online teaching, did what they need to do in school from home. Chinese television were broadcasting. But as soon as they can return, that element has been stopped. Should we stop that? Actually, I don't think so. We want to use technology. We want our learning to take place outside the classroom, outside school. We want our learning to take place globally. How do we emphasize that? How do we change that piece? So I hope that when we think about going back to school, we're not going back to the same education. We may be going back to the same school, but not the same education. We need an education that's drastically different. Then another question I want to raise for all of us. I know Alaska schools were quite advanced in thinking about social emotional learning. We're adopting those models. We have new models of learning. I'm a person who's really trying to bring things together to think about the issue. I think, when I look at the social emotional learning adopted in many schools in Alaska, they were good, they were nice, but at the same time, the social emotional learning is very narrowly defined. It's actually very racist in many of the social emotional learning standards. This was before the pandemic. However, today, I want to bring the issue about social emotional learning, social emotional well-being, psychological well-being, academic well-being, all of this be combined together. Now, this is the time for all of us. This is the main thing I'm going to talk about. How do we rethink education? I was just talking about education as before, how the pandemic might have interrupted. And of course, for all of you in schools, you have to worry about school budget being cut. Maybe not in Alaska, you guys have enough oil, maybe your budget will never be cut. But in other places, many places face big budget cuts. How do schools deal with that? So my main point, here's my main point today. I think, in our education, we have not treated students as the owners of learning. Many years ago, when I was in Alaska, I was really trying to move along that line to encourage us to think about students as partners of learning, as owners of learning. And over the last really 4 years, I've done more research, I've done more thinking. That's probably where it will happen next. So as you know, in schools, in education, traditional schooling or education, I joke about this, say that children are our biggest problems in education. Without children, education would be perfect. Everybody would be happy if without children in education. Education would run very smoothly. Education is a problem for schools for 2 reasons. Children are diverse. That's what gives all schools all the problems. I don't know if you noticed that for all kinds of reasons, children, all kinds of reasons, meaning they have natural born reasons. Children are born to be different. They have different potentials, different intelligences, different social emotional traits. And that potential, when you interact with the experience, with your family, your community, your culture, your schools, they interact. And then we have different children. Children have different strengths, different weaknesses. Some children are really good with the social emotional, others may be less. Some children are really good at reading, and others maybe not. It's a lot of very diversity things. So, but schools, I don't know if you noticed that. Schools want our children to be the same. To be the same. We have a state curriculum. The state curriculum describes the graduate profile of our students. When they graduate at this time, they shall be like this. We have math, reading, science, history. We have now social emotional descriptions of them. We want children to be the same. Now, they come in different, they go out to be the same. You know how hard it is to make children the same, to exactly make them the same. And also the sameness is what states or even federal government to say, if you can achieve what we describe for you, if you can pass the state tests, you are the same and you are going to be successful in the future. We know that's a lie. That's called college and career readiness. We have that CCR. We know that's a lie because you know how many universities we have? We got over 4,000 universities, community colleges. If you want to go to the University of Alaska, that might have a different requirement than you go to Yale or Harvard. What requires you to go to in a community college might be different from going to a state university. And you know how many majors universities have? From tens of thousands. How can you be ready, have one little thing to be successful, let alone jobs? How can you become career and college readiness? It's impossible. That's just a lie and make you feel good about it. And also most important, that description only describes a very small part of you. You know, what's important now here is to think about the second thing. When you are the same, you compete with each other. And you compete with each other. So therefore, you know, look at SAT scores. I don't know how many of you know the SAT. Many of you may know. Well, SAT is going to collapse. I think it's going to die anyway. But it's been dominant in our schools for a long time. If you look at SAT scores, what does it do? It gets you into college, but gets somebody else out of college. It's a manufacturer of losers. Because in order for you to be good, you know, at 99 percentile, you have to make other people to be worse than you. It's really not trying to make everybody succeed. It's going to make everybody the same. So our first trouble is that we don't know what to do with diversity. So in our schools, we divide them into gifted and talented, special education, we have remediation. We try to homogenize people. That's wrong. Because what makes a person successful, makes a person thrive in a new age is diversity, is uniqueness. If you are unique, acknowledge your weaknesses, but be really good at what you do, that you are different. You've done something about your difference. You're creative and entrepreneur about certain content, certain domains. You will be able to thrive. Universities look for them. Jobs look for them. And not everyone needs to go to college. And there's all kinds of new possibilities. Even given the COVID pandemic, it has recreated a new workplace. You know, like Google and Facebook, others allowing people to work from home. They're also hiring people differently. So the second problem with children that schools have a challenge is children are alive. Our kids are alive kids. What does that mean when they're alive? So, you know, if you look at our school curriculum right now, we want children from year 1 to year 2, first grade, second grade, this is how much you should learn. And we expect everybody to learn that much. You know, year 1 and first grade, second grade, that's what we think about. And so year 3 and year 4 is one the same thing. So this is what I joke about this. I don't know if you have tried to cast or throw away a bird into the sky. If you're throwing a dead bird, you can predict how far the bird can go and when the bird will reach what point. But if you try to throw a live bird, you might get a different consequence. A live bird does not follow you nearly as much as a dead bird. Our children, you know this, your lovely children, they are alive, they are intentional, they are thinking, they are acting, they have strength, they have weaknesses, they have passions. All of those factors affect how they react to the one thing or two things of teaching and learning. So what I'm arguing, first point, we want to make sure our children are co-owners of learning with us as adults. So may I propose to you to think about, what if our school curriculum is a curriculum of 3 parts? 3 parts. Number 1, we live in a society, we pay taxes, therefore the government has the right to do this, to require our students to learn something. You live in Alaska, you take money from the Alaskan government get the money from taxpayers. They should have some expectations. So might we expect the state, or maybe the federal government, can have certain level of description of curriculum, what every student has to learn. That's the first part, but very small, maybe 30%. That every student should learn about this social norms, the civics, the 3 branches of government, and all those things. Maybe basic literacy and numeracy can be all part of that. Then the next part of the curriculum would be offered by schools. Each school is located in a location, represents local culture, representing local communities. And a school has to be different from another school. So can a school make up the other third of the curriculum? Like you come to my school does this. And so we combine that with the federal government, with the state government, the federal government requirement. That makes me about 50–60% of the curriculum. Then the rest should belong to the students. The first and second part describes the basics, the floor expectations. As a person, you should know this. You should be able to do this, as we expect our children to do as a society. Then the third part that belongs to the student should be about what makes them successful. That's the unique piece. That's called a personalized curriculum. The personalized curriculum, that piece, you can negotiate with adults from year 1, from kindergarten on, first grade, and all adults with parents, teachers to say, what would you like to learn? What would you like to do? And today, with globalization, with technology, as a teacher, you don't really have to worry about teaching everything. You need to worry about getting everybody interested in pursuing that, to change that. So that's the first big piece of how I think education should be changing, and actually is changing in that way. I don't say schools doing that, but I don't know if you've noticed, the pandemic pods, many families are shopping different pods to help their children to grow in their own ways. That is actually a threat to public education. I don't know how that's going to end, but that's happening. You see parents, you see students connecting across the state, across the countries. They're really working on something that fits them, that meets their needs, that helps them to become great and unique in their own ways. As teachers, as educators, how do we react to that? Well, I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge children deserves the right to self-determination. Self-determination is a human right, but a lot of times when students go to school, they lose that. They don't get to decide what to do in our schools, traditional schools. We decide. We never invite our students to decide what they want to do. We decide the curriculum, the course we give them. We might ask them for their opinions, but most of the time it doesn't really matter. But students should have the right to self-determination. Everybody should have the right to self-determination. So we need to really acknowledge our children are the owners of their own learning. If they take ownership, they come to you. You support them. You don't need to motivate them, really. Children are natural born learners. They are born to be learners. Honestly, human beings, creativity is the key to humanity. Creativity is also the foundation of all learning. Children, when they're born, they seek self-direction. Do you remember your children fighting with you to try to eat, try to do their laundry, try to do things? That's what they're fighting. They're fighting for their self-determination. And then they learn. They're challenged by uncertainty, by unknown, so they need to have their rights. But in our schools, we teach them not to. We teach them to rely on us. That's why schools become disengaging. Children are not doing much because they're only solving, actually they're not even solving problems. They're memorizing the solutions to existing problems. There's nothing new, nothing interesting for our children. And then they become disengaged. Then the ones with good work ethics follow you. They do it. But they lost the interest, lost the impact. So what I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is that we as teachers try to cultivate, support the development of children's rights to self-determination. I just wrote a book about that called Teaching Children to Become Self-Determined Learners. I co-authored that with Michael Wehmeyer. So we did a lot of thinking and research about how do you help people become self-determined learners. The second thing I think for teachers, I want to encourage us to do is to retreat from instruction or lecturing. As you probably noticed today, a lot of researchers have done this, hybrid learning, blended learning, online learning, whatever you call this thing. You can find lectures, instructions, or explanations of concepts and content from your textbook, from your curriculum, online. Quite often, they're done very well. There's much more than Khan Academy. There's a lot more things. And if you want to find something, learn something. This is why, I think Americans' Thanksgiving dinner has become better because of YouTube. You all have learned something beyond your grandma's recipe. You've become more innovative. I don't know, so we learn a lot of things. Try not to be the instructional machine in your classroom. Try not to teach in that way. Let students do it. Curate the resources. We are best at being coaches. We understand our students. We're human teachers. Teachers need to move away from being a mechanical device to instruct. We need to build relationships with our students, and we need to, in our classes, do less of so-called large group activities. Talk to individuals, work with small groups. We change our role from the instructor to the life coach, to the project manager, to truly the facilitator, to know every child, to help every child find something that fits their passion, that works with their personal profile, just work on that aspect. And the third piece, I think the future of education that has to come in. The first part is personalized curriculum, the 3 parts. Second of all is a change of teaching. The third one is a global connection. I think today with the COVID pandemic, we are putting our students on the global stage. We have to engage our students. I feel very bad right now today because I'm speaking to Alaska, this World Affairs. Over the past 4 years, Americans' education has not been focused on global competencies. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, global competency was on the rise, was on the globe. Everybody seemed to be happy. I don't know if you remember that 4 or 5 years ago, where, US, China had a 10-year visa, people were traveling, everybody were opening their visas. So, boom, suddenly we lost that. Right now, if you go to schools, who is talking about that? But this is very dangerous. We have to make sure our children are globally engaged. This is the dark moment of education. But this dark moment of education comes from many years of not addressing this issue of humanity. So in many ways, to this situation, if you look at geopolitics, US-China relationships, China-German relationships, India relationship, the whole world is like a mess. But this mess is no different from World War I or World War II. It's a readjustment of globalization. Because technology moved too fast, created massive inequities, education did not catch up to that. I think about maybe 4 years ago, I did say this. Maybe I said this, education was in trouble because there is a race between technology and education. When technology moves too fast, creates new jobs, new possibilities, but the middle class are not educated to take advantage of that. The collapse, huge inequities, people began to fight. That's how it happens. Xenophobia, anti-immigration, racial issues all rise. This is what I've seen in the past 4 or 5 years. That's what happened. So education since 1980s, I've been focusing too much on economic power, too much on how do you as an individual succeed, but not treating human beings as a member of the large human society. Large human society of Alaska, your communities, of Fairbank, of Anchorage, Alaska, the US, the world. We're not dealing with that. But globalization is not dead. Globalization is alive. It's been reconfigured. It has been reconfigured. We don't know in 5, 10 years what's going to happen. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm sure it's going to be settled by a lot of graduates from our schools. So I think now, more than ever, every school should really work very hard to make sure our children are globally connected, to have global courses. Why can't your students take a course from another country? Well, there are so many actual organizations, by the way. I just got an email asking me to speak into Hong Kong. A group of us international schools, I said, why don't we just build global academies and we can share those courses? Why can't we do that? Your students can work with anybody, should be working with anybody. They are citizens of Alaska, of the US, but also citizens of the globe. I am not sure. Look at the pandemic. By the way, 10 years ago, I wrote about the H1N1 pandemics. That's what I wrote about. I said, how globalization needs to deal with, that's H1N1. Luckily, it did not spread very far at that time. But however, the pandemics, climate change, environmental disasters. I just had a fire near me, no more than 20 miles away. It was very scary. Burned 173,000 kind of acres. That was scary. And I almost had to evacuate 2 weeks ago. And it's happening. We are all part of this. Nobody can escape. But schools, honestly, have not taught children to participate in advocating for social issues, for global social issues. Schools, I want to say this, do not prepare children for the future. We don't prepare them for the future. We prepare them to create the future. Our students are the creators of our retirement. So we want to be very careful, okay? They create our retirement. There's no one who has made that future and waiting for all children to walk into. They are the creators of the future. So if you want to summarize and end this, I think the COVID is a very good warning to all of us. But it also is an experience that made all of us change really fast. It proves we can change. So in the future, I think education has to be a lot more about students, less about the curriculum. As an educator, do you see the child grow as a human being, as a global human being, as a human being who is creating the future for them and creating the retirement for us? Look at the child first before you look at the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhao. We have a lot of questions coming in, and so I'm going to just start coming at you in the amount of time that we have left. And I want to quote you on that: we don't prepare students for the future, we prepare students to create the future. What a great mindset and place to start in this discussion. So you mentioned, we have a question here about class sizes. You've mentioned here a lot of new ideas and thoughts and ways to look at education, right? Creating a child that has control of their own destiny, creating children who have creativity, and creating globally minded citizens. A lot of things that are different. So when we talk about, the question is about class size. If we were to do that, what is an ideal class size for this sort of change in paradigm of education?
Thank you. I'm actually not worried about class size because each class, let's imagine you have 30 students. But if you have 30 students, you can quickly probably devolve them into different ways. You never teach 30 students because if you teach 30 students, you'll be missing 20 of them. You'll be teaching 10 of them. That's just typical. So what happens, for example, I've been working with a school in Beijing. So what they do, you give the curriculum to students and you give them some assessment if they're winning. You probably will find 4 or 5 students say, I know that stuff. I don't need to learn that. They may go learn something else. So they can propose something else. Then you probably will find another 5 to 10 students say, I don't really want to listen to you, but I can go build my own learning resources. You don't teach them. Then you work with them on the side. Then you may have a few students who really want you to teach them. I think there's a very different ways of organize a class rather than trying to tie everybody together. I'm running experiments in China with 60 to 65 students in a class. We're running online. That's actually fascinating to do it. You can still divide them up. And also, don't underestimate your students. Your students can provide peer tutoring, mentoring of each other, then construct different things. Don't think yourself as the only source of learning. So that's what my answer would be.
Okay, here's another question. It says, much is made of how American children compare to other countries when comparing academic achievement. So what is your views and thoughts on this? American children compared to other countries when it comes to academic achievement?
Well, I think this question comes from a very savvy reader who has been very following the international comparative studies. If you look at international comparative studies, American kids don't do well compared to East Asian countries, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. American students do horrible. And on average, I'm not a big average person. That's why I've been very critical of international assessments like that in terms of academics. So first of all, if you look at America, out of kids in Massachusetts, they do better than other kids in other places. The rich kids do better in academic testing. I think it really has to do with how do you view the purpose of education. I like American education because it has traditionally been very broad. It has really reduced the time of focusing on academics. Like, well, by the way, it's not really academics. It's just a few subjects, like math, reading, and science, and that happens to be taking a lot of time in Asia. But if you spend more time on those 3 subjects, you won't have time to go to the museum. You won't have time to hang out in the art gallery. You won't have time to be creative, to play with your computers, to develop new software. So basically, it's a matter of focus. Or what you focus on something else. Like since the 1980s, people were talking about how Japanese students are better than American students. 90s, we're talking about how Korean students are getting better. American students have lost this game for a long time in traditional average. But America as a nation really has not really lost dramatically, except for COVID. This is horrible, but that has nothing to do with how well our kids are. America remains very innovative and creative. I'm not praising American education to do that. I think we have a very different way of understanding this. I don't believe any of the international tests test what really matters. Plus right now, I think in the future, I think what matters rests with individuals. I'm going to send you a copy of a book I wrote. I think this is after that. And so maybe you can think about how this matters in different ways. So I'm going to put in the chat room, just in case you're curious about all this. I did a big analysis of everything here. And here we go. If you click on that, you'll find it. Yeah. So there's a lot of comparison analysis in that. So I don't think American students are necessarily better or worse. But we have more room to develop different capabilities. However, American education faces one of the biggest challenges, that is inequity. We have good schools, we have very good schools, we have some really horrible schools that we need to help develop.
Okay, this question changes a little bit our focus from K through 12 and on to pre-K. So this question is, does the future of education post-COVID include an expanded focus and funding for adequate prenatal and 0 to 3-year health infancy? So focusing on the child's development and education prenatal and 0 to 3 infancy. If not, why and what can be done? This would include reducing the high rates of abuse and neglect. What are your thoughts on that period for development of a child?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm not a really policymaker, so I don't have any money. Anything I say may or may not matter. I've lived in Oregon for a while. Even though I teach in Kansas, I'm still in Oregon. So I observed this fight at the state level of legislatures. Should they, for example, even require all 3-year-olds go to kindergarten? That's been a very interesting fight. It kind of relates to your question. But some people say no, some people say yes. I think that really has to do with not so much, the first thing, of course, is funding, but what do you do with the funding? I think a lot of people say, which part of a child is home? Which part of a child is government? When your government funds this, the government will dictate or decide what they want to learn. So if we accept what my proposal now, 3-3-4, government, school, and personal, I would support it. I would support government funding. But if we go back, we had Head Start since 1970s. We have all these different programs. But I would say this, okay, government should fund prenatal or whatever support as much as possible. However, I'm very worried about the individual rights. If government gives you a curriculum to say your students should only study this, give you like 3 subjects, drive your students all pre-instate academics, academic studies in those areas, not play, I think it can be very dangerous. So but I'm not a really finance person. I'm not a government policy person. I don't know how the money should be spent. I only know if we spend money from taxpayers and their representatives have a right to regulate.
There's a lot of talk in the chatter in the chat room about your discussion on standardized tests and profounding people don't really seem like care for standardized tests. So we use them, this question says, right, we use them as a tool to show that our public education is effective. And what you're talking about here are different stakeholders. You have the government as a stakeholder, you have the individual student as a stakeholder, maybe society as a stakeholder. You're talking about a bunch of different stakeholders. So how do you recommend that schools answer the questions regarding the efficacy? So if they're getting funding, is the funding being used successfully? How effective are they under this new proposal, and how do you measure that?
Well, I think government always wants to know how their money is spent. Governors want to compete with each other, how they're doing, different education ministers or heads of education at the state level. But I think we probably should do this. Every student, they should take some kind of tests to show they've met the government requirements. Beyond that, should be done by schools. Schools and teachers and the students negotiate their roles. I hate standardized testing, by the way, but if government wants to test, they should test, but test as little as possible as easy as possible for students, only the basics, very basic things. But I would love to see students demonstrating their products. My view of learning should be what I call product-oriented learning. I would like students to discover problems worth solving, develop the solution to that problem. That drives learning. Because today, as you know, knowledge and information is very easy. We forget them. We remember them, we forget them. What's different is that competencies, thinking skills, how do we think? How do we create new possibilities? There are very different sets of things. I can tell you, I forgot a lot of things I learned. And when I write a book, I learn a lot of things, but then I forget. I go do something else. But what I learned are the big wisdom. Wisdoms, don't forget. Wisdoms are hard to come by, and they need us to go through authentic learning experiences. So I love students to say, find something that's purposeful, that's worth a problem worth solving. That you have your strength. You use your strength to solve other people's problems so you can become valuable. Then you allow your weakness to be addressed by others. Therefore, we create a human interdependence. I'm running a project called Human Interdependence Project. We're trying to get students from around the globe. We really do. I can send you the information list later on. We're going to run the second group in January. We just finished one. So we have students from many countries. They just participate in, they watch online, they watch our things, and they said, okay, let's learn about how are you valuable to other people? You solve other people's problems, and vice versa. How do you do that? So that's we change the definition of success, is that we become problem solvers of other people's problems using our strength. So I think learning should be driven by problems. Problems you identify, but not like massive problems. I think I don't know if as parents, as educators, you've tried this. Ask your students, if they're in 5th grade or 8th grade, to identify a problem that's worth solving and that they can solve. It's going to be very difficult. They either go with the big problems, like global warming. I want to solve that. You can't solve global warming, but you can do something about that. Or they go very tiny and small. My dog doesn't eat this food and I want to cook something better. That's not worth it. You ask them to justify, why do you think they can solve this problem? It's actually quite challenging. Once they did that, then they learn from others, they learn from books, and learn from videos to develop the solution. Then they showcase their work, their final works. I use the term final works, something they produce. That's for good assessment.
So you're talking here, I hear you mention having discussions with different people around the world, videos, a lot of technological things are woven into education as you're describing here. We have a question about how important then is universal access to the internet and reliable technologies to this type of vision. There's a huge disparity, obviously, in communities, including here in Anchorage and around Alaska. And so if you could address that high-speed internet, how important is that on a global universal access level?
Well, universal access to the internet is like access to water. Everybody should have access to it. It's like as universal access to telephone. I think the federal government since 1990s have been trying to bridge that gap, through many different ways. They charge, every telephone users a fee to support that, So I think universal access to technology, to the internet is essential. If you live in the globalized world, that is what makes you globalized. It is the most fundamental, actually, human rights. It is not a privilege. It's people should have access to that in the country. And that is key to learning, key to living. You can imagine right now in life, a lot of people, where do they shop? Where do they make friends? Who do they talk with? I think that's why, the pandemic has helped some schools getting some technology from companies who donated them, but we need to universalize high-speed access to the internet. Maybe you can do it. At least maybe you can help with that. Let's just get everybody high-speed access.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. Okay, we have about 5 more minutes. I'm hoping that you can finish out our hour and just expand a little bit more about your thought about, we're not preparing students for the future, we're preparing students to create the future, and entrepreneurship. What are we wanting of our students in the future?
Thank you. Well, every school I've seen always say we prepare you to succeed in the future. But really, nobody knows what the future is. You imagine our students coming to our school in 15 years, and they graduate, they live their future, they remake their future. Depends on who they are. They're always participating. So the first idea is that when you are in a traffic jam, don't complain there's a traffic jam, because you are the jam, you are part of it. So students are makers, that they are participating in this process. So that's why, it comes from the same idea about education. Children are in education, they remake the education. So we had this naive perspective, there is a future someone has made, then you will be ready for that future. I think that's just wrong. The second thing I think it's important to understand is that truly when we complain about the government officials, politicians, we blame them, we curse them, we say, oh, they're horrible people. Remember, they are graduates of our schools. Maybe not your school, but they did graduate from some schools. What did we do? We must have done something wrong, if we don't like them, something. So we have this responsibility to teach them, because they are the makers of the future. And entrepreneurship is a big part of this, is that I really believe in the future. Right now, look, today, technology creates all kinds of possibilities. Policies have been thinking too much about, how technology replaces human beings, But at the same time, the new jobs, new possibilities created by technology have to be translated into reality by entrepreneurs. If you're an entrepreneur, there's so much you can do. Have you noticed how many, I'm not encouraging this, okay. However, if you look how many YouTube stars we've created, people they're amazing. They're making all kinds of money, but I'm not encouraging everybody to do that. That's a very small area, but that's just an easy example. Look at, actually a better example, Greta Thunberg. Greta, the Greta phenomena from Sweden. That's amazing, right? But again, I'm not asking people to copy. You cannot copy any successful person. You have to be uniquely your own, but be very entrepreneurial. Learning is done by you. Schools and teachers work for the students, not vice versa. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so very much for joining us here at the Alaska World Affairs Council, and for supporting our commitment to bring quality educational programs to you, and our passion to increase all of our global competency. If you have any comments or suggestions on our format or what you'd like to see, please send them our way. We have a lot more programs coming down the pike. We hope to see you all again soon. And I want to give a very warm thank you again to our featured speaker, the incredible Dr. Yong Zhao, to our members and sponsors who support this great organization, and to all of you out there for sharing your lunch hour with us. And we look forward to connecting with all of you again soon. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again, Dr. Zhao.
Thank you. Take care.